Today we are going to consider Augustine's Epistemology. And this is one of those little points along the way. Sometimes we talk about things that are of less importance. This is an occasion where we're talking about something of greater importance. So I do want you to know this. Try to get it. It's not, I don't think, impossible, but it takes a little bit of application of those brain things to kind of think it through with me. So I want you to work with me on that. Mr. Chile.
Is there an E at the end of Augustine's name?
That is a long-standing dispute, my son. The majority of people in the world would say yes. But that enlightened few, the elect of Israel, realized that there should not be an E there. It should be Augustin. And unfortunately, an E at the end invites us to mispronounce his name, Augustine. It's Augustin, you know? So to help us remember Aurelius Augustin, I leave the E off as some others do. But I will say this to you. If you go off to college, which I'm assuming a few of you might, and if you take a class that covers, in part, this particular character, you would be well advised to include the E. Otherwise, some unenlightened professors of yours may actually think you've misspelled it. You may want to correct them later, politely, modestly, say, you know, some people think his name should be spelled, and they might actually follow you in your new quest to change the world. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, not a good place to start. I wouldn't. You might kind of build up to that, you know. So anyway, so I tend to spell it without the E, but I am quite aware that I'm in a minority on that. All right. Augustine's epistemology is, I think, best understood if we think of a kind of box. So I'm going to put this up here, and it looks like this. I only do the little dotted lines to save ink, you understand. If I were a little more liberal, I would use solid lines, but I'm trying to. These things cost money. You know they cost money? I thought Sydney was going to loan me one. She thought I was impoverished here. All right, so there's three columns, you'll notice, in 3 rows, and you will want to be able to fill in the blanks and also explain the content of each of these blanks. The first column stands for being. And in some ways, the first column represents the point of departure for his epistemology, which is his ontology. So we start there. In the second column, you'll head reason. And the third one, knowledge. So you can see immediately that his theory of knowledge is going to be related to, as we would expect, his theory of being. And in some ways, this is not simply his epistemology, but it covers a little bit of his ontology as well. I think it's safe to say that Augustine formulated this idea after he read Plotinus. But it is not, on its face, Neoplatonism. It has some Neoplatonic aspects to it. But that doesn't mean it's necessarily wrong. It just means that he's using some of this as a kind of structural way of approaching the topic. All right. So the first column here, the first set of terms, you'll put God here, man, second, body, third. So Josiah, enduring your ultimate metaphysical dualism there with Stephen, you still seem to be doing all right. You are winning, I suppose. Maybe not.
No, it's
A dualism, nobody ever wins. Yeah. In what sense would that structure, God, man, body, represent something reminiscent of Neoplatonism? Did you get it closed? It takes some muscle. You have to kind of...
I think it kind of follows the same structure of the idea of the one.
You're all listening to Josiah, right? He has your undivided attention. Thank you.
I think it follows Plotinus' structure of okay, God's kind of like the one.
Okay. We have God at the top.
And then man would be kind of the psyche, or I think.
Well, man is... Where is man vis-a-vis God and vis-a-vis everything else?
Well, he's below God, but above the body.
Exactly. And so, we have man kind of an intermediate status here, right?
Yeah. Followed by
Okay.
that.
And then what would this correspond to in Neoplatonism?
It's either fusis or matter. I don't know which.
Probably going to be matter.
Matter.
I think Augustin decided to use the word body just to make sure he wasn't just using Plotinus' language. But it is the same thing as matter. All right? I saw your hand over here, Megan. I wasn't ignoring you. Were you going to say that? Yeah. Now let me ask you this. Josiah has just recognized that there is what some people could call a Neoplatonic aspect to the way that Augustine has developed his ontology. Would you say that you could make a case biblically for this arrangement? If I said to you, does this arrangement of stuff, beginning with God at the top, matter down here, and so on, represent any kind of biblical outlook? Who would like to take that on? Spencer?
Well, God says that man is the most prized of his creation.
Sure.
And so then you could go, like, God, well, he's the creator, so he'd be at the top, and then man, and then the rest of.
Yeah.
So.
So do you see that even though somebody could call this Neoplatonic, doesn't make it not biblical, right? There is a sense in which, when we look at the biblical arrangement, we know that God is at the top. We don't have any idea that we're competing with him. We know that there is a creation, and we know that man, in some sense or other, is above the creation and below God, right? I'm saying this, it may seem like I'm saying something kind of obvious, but maybe I'm just battle wounded, because I've had to deal with this question occasionally. Oh, Augustine, he was just a Neoplatonic. I mean, look at that. God, man, and he just got that straight from Plotinus. You go, well, okay. Plotinus said something like that, but the Bible said something like that. And so it doesn't mean Plotinus is necessarily wrong, because he sets up a grid that looks a little bit like that, and that Augustine agrees with it. Let's don't impugn the guy's integrity and call him just a closet heretic because he happens to use Neoplatonic categories. Fair enough, Sydney? You with me? Because you will have this conversation someday. Right now you're thinking, who cares? Someday you will care. So this is the time to pay attention, so when the someday comes, you will actually appreciate this. All right, so that's where it starts. So it is, candidly, the same approach, generally speaking, that Plotinus took. What's different? What does Plotinus have that Augustine, at least at this point, has not included yet? What do you find there, Nicole?
The soul.
Okay. But I don't want you to rule that out, because you're going to see as we work our way along that, remember, Plotinus said that man is a blank of everything else. And the word that goes in that blank is the word. Man is a, Joe?
Microcosm.
Microcosm. You all know that word, right? You can use it casually in a conversation. Go home, sit down with your folks, talk about microcosmic philosophy, and they go, well, we're really getting our money's worth at that school. Look at that language you're using. Well, so anyway, that's the word. Well, Augustine tends to agree. Augustine agrees. Man is microcosmic. But he doesn't work it out quite the way Plotinus did. So this is where we need to make some distinctions, even as we acknowledge points where it's comparable. And this brings us to reason, and there's 3 levels of reason. First level, top box, is called eternal reason. Second box, not surprisingly, is called human reason. Third box is called seminal reason. All right, now this is where you need to keep your eye on the ball. When he talks about eternal reason, he means reason in the mind of God. He doesn't mean reason in which we directly participate. In other words, this is God's mind. He says we can know this reason. That's why we can talk about it in a class in philosophy, is because we have some access to the mind of God. We can, as some people say, think God's thoughts after him, but that's not the same thing as saying we have this. We are kind of looking at it, but the eternal reason for Augustine is God thinking. This is God's mind. All right? Asterisk. God's mind has a variety of categories in which God thinks. So I just want to give these to you, write them down, then we'll talk about them a little bit. Don't try to squeeze them inside the box. They will not fit. They go outside the box in an extended footnote. All right, so this should go below the box. Have I upset? Yeah. All right, so here's what goes there. First of all, universals. Universals. Or, to use the term that you would find in Plato, you could say instead of universals, the word. Kayla, any idea? What's the word? Jordan, any idea? The word? You all know it. Jacob, what's the word? Instead of universals, thinking platonically, we could use the word. Do not know. Blank stare. Spencer knows, I bet.
Is it forms?
Forms! Okay. So universals in Plato is simply the forms, the world of the forms. So, get this. Augustine agrees with Plato there is the world of the forms. That world is there. That's why Plato thought of it. Our intuitions are correct. There is some sense we have of an eternal, transcendent order of perfect truth. Plato didn't get that answer wrong. He got that right on the cosmic quiz. And so Augustine agrees that this is the truth of God's mind, and this is where we therefore find, first of all, this notion of forms or universals, which you may also call forms. The perfect circle. You know? I've had a very smart dog. I don't have it anymore, but I did for a while. He was very smart. Obedient. Sometimes I thought he could understand what I was saying. You ever had a dog like that? Just, you say something to them and they look at you as if they really get it? You never had a dog like that. Well, I have had brilliant dogs. But as smart as my dog was, I don't think that dog ever actually thought about a perfect circle. or a perfect equilateral triangle. He might have thought about a perfect bowl of Purina dog chow. I don't know. But that's a different deal. This seems to be something that we are uniquely capable of doing, and you are able to do it. And Augustine is impressed that it's humans that can do this. But this is still us looking in from the outside. We didn't create that world of perfect circles, or equilateral triangles, or chair nests, or anything, but we somehow know about it. You know, we have an intuition, right, Matt? There's nothing on that wall over there. I'm over here, actually. See the blank stare, you know, it makes me nervous. Are you on something? No, okay. All right, so that's the first thing. Universals, first idea. Second thing that is in this world is logic. Plato, by the way, would agree with this, but Augustine wants to spell it out separately. The entire notion of the rules of reason. A cannot both be A and non-A at the same time in the same space. Principle of causation. Ex nihilo nihil fit. That stuff. All of that pure, logical, rational apparatus that's in your brain is thought first by God before it was ever thought by you. Third, predication. Predication. Anybody have any idea what is intended by the word predication? Any volunteers, Laura? What is meant by the term predication?
I can only think of like the grammar predicate.
All right, let's start there. What does it mean there?
Something to do with the noun that is it something to do with a subject predicate.
Yeah, so right. The subject and the predicate. So you're thinking of a sentence, right? You're exactly on point. What is a sentence? Let me ask you this. Laura, I assert to you, book. Okay? Is that a sentence? No, it is not a sentence. It's a word. Connect a predicate to that word book so that you have formulated a sentence.
Did you say this is a book?
All right? Or we could simplify it and just say book is. Or I could say this book is. Or I could, as you said, say this is a book. Right? They're all subtly different. But in each case, we've added a predicate. And what's the fundamental content of the predicate that we've added to the noun book? Alicia, what have we added? What is the predicate added? So that now we're not simply saying the word book, but we're predicating. What's going on there?
You have a verb.
A verb, yes. And so what's happened? What is the verb accomplished?
It provides motion and action exceeding the noun.
Okay, and in a much broader sense, that's true, it's exactly what it's done. So in a broader sense, what has that accomplished?
Provides a complete sentence.
It provides, and what is a complete sentence? You see, we think about this stuff all the time. We never really think about it, do we? What is that? What does a complete sentence do? What's it achieving?
It gives meaning to a word.
It's giving meaning to the word. That's right. It's communicating some kind of content. And we do this so habitually, we don't stop and think about what we've done. A sentence is that sort of verbal construction by which information is communicated. If I just say book, I haven't communicated any information, have I? I mean, it's a word. It's just floating out there. It may, invoke in your mind an image of some kind of object like this, and like 100 others that we could, point out in this room, but it hasn't told you anything. Book says nothing. Horse, tree. Loudmouth. Window. What have I said? I've said nothing. If I got up and lectured to you, I could do it for 50 minutes, and I said, man, wall, fire, ground, sky. You know, you'd be going, oh, I'm paying money for this? Because I've said nothing, have I? I've used words. I could even use some verbs. Run, climb. But as soon as I join these things together, as soon as I join subject with predicate, even something as simple as book is, I've communicated. Now, it might be a pretty lousy lecture. You might not be getting a lot of content, but I've made a big step, haven't I, when I go from book to book is. You know, then I could say something really complicated. Book is brown and black. Whoa. Now that's the real content. And we go way on beyond that. But you realize that until I can put something together in a sentence, and a sentence by definition is a joining of a subject, a nominative, with a predicate, until I've done that, even at the simplest level, I have communicated nothing. And so the point is, communication itself, and by the way, communication involves knowledge, which is what we're talking about, epistemology, has to do with subjects and predicates. And at this point, he's saying the whole notion of predication, of saying anything about anything, doesn't begin in human invention. This is not a human contrivance. That in itself must be something in the mind of God. God is the first one who ever spoke. The whole notion of speaking. And God said, "Let there be light." Well, apart from the whole cosmology of how light came to be, the very fact that God said tells us that in some sense there's predication going on in the mind of God. Right? And that we are somehow participating in a divine thing. What's the first evidence of that biblically? That we are somehow unique in the creation in this world because we have this ability to predicate. Where's the first evidence of that biblically? Not about God, but about man. Where do we see that show up? Nicole, where's the first evidence of this kind of divine capacity we have to predicate?
God asked Adam to name things.
Exactly. And that is predication. That is wildebeest. That is saber-toothed tiger. Oh. Right? You ever wonder, what did saber-toothed tigers eat before the fall? First time I ever had that question put to me was by a PhD who was questioning my confidence in the Bible. And he asked me, it was a perfect setup. He says, so you believe generally that the evidence that's produced by, geological and archaeological discoveries like various animals, dinosaurs, etc., saber-toothed tigers. Oh, yeah, sure. I don't think that stuff just happened by accident. I think there were probably. And so do you think those critters were created by God? Yeah, actually I do. And so they were created before the fall. And then I saw, of course, the trap, Yeah. I'm losing my time. And what were they eating? Are you telling me there's that kind of bloody carnage going on in the perfect paradise? Saber-toothed tigers hunting down and grabbing and biting into the throats of poor antelopes and so on so they can get their evening meal? That doesn't sound very paradisical to me. Thanks, I'll get back to you on that. So if you ever figure out the answer to that, then let me know. What's that?
You're not going to tell us what you think?
I don't know the answer.
You don't know?
I mean, do you know the answer? No. Well, I don't either. Contrary to popular opinion, I am not that old. This man probably knows. And, so I would say if you need really true wisdom on this subject, then you should go ask him.
Yes.
Because kids are never smarter, let me tell you this, than when they're in the 6th grade. From then it's downhill. So this is the man, this is the guru. How may we serve you?
Let's see. Avery, Trevor.
Trevor's in Indonesia.
In Indonesia?
Yeah.
Can't see him though.
No.
Jordan, Matt, Josiah.
They're all the problem students anyway. You know, that's good.
Just for a moment.
All right.
Longer than a moment.
Un momento. Quanto tempo? Un momento, due momento. That's too many. All right. So I just want you to appreciate, in the absence of these people, that predication is itself something that is held in very high esteem biblically, our ability to do that. All right, next one on our little extended footnote here, numbers. The entire ability to do mathematics, the very nature of mathematics, is divine, Augustin says. It isn't just accidental. God is the one who thought of the quadratic formula. Thank you. Go back. Would you unlock the... Thank you. Yeah, good idea. Good. All right. Next one. Attention, please. Next one. Morality. That the very idea that there is a distinction between that which is good and that which is evil, which, by the way, is a category outside the actual concrete and mortar of this world, right? It's a separate category of thought. I can say to you, book, that communicates nothing. I can say to you, book is, that communicates something. Then I can say, book should be. That's something else, isn't it? I can say something is, that does not necessarily tell me whether it ought to be. I can say, Sarah is. And I've just made a statement, which in this case I presume is true. At least my senses tell me. But it doesn't answer the question, Sarah should be. Should she be here? Is there somewhere else she ought to be? That's an entirely separate consideration which cannot be necessarily answered simply by considering the concrete of this world. The fact that you're here is a fact of existence. Whether you should be here is a very different question. Well, that is something that begins in the mind of God. And in fact, we can only talk about that question because there is God. If there is no God, there could be no rational discourse about whether something should or should not be. This is one of the most perplexing questions, really, I think, for the atheist to wrestle with. He wants or she wants to hang on to a morality, generally, but get rid of the only rational basis for morality, and it creates a most interesting tangle of what amounts to really kind of self-contradiction. Yeah.
Are these 5 categories, are they going from greatest to...
No, they're not. There's no order in terms of importance here, necessarily. No. Josiah.
Could you quickly go over what numbers was?
Numbers is math. Just the whole idea of mathematics. Not just 2 + 2 = 4, but Einsteinian math. All of it. The whole realm of number as a way in which we think, he would say, is in the mind of God. Okay. The last one in our little list is beauty. And notice that does represent a separate class, right? Different idea. I can say Sarah is, that's predication. I can say Sarah is one. There's not three of them in here. I can say Sarah ought to be here. I can say Sarah's beautiful. Right?
Yes.
Which is plainly the case. And in each case, do you notice, please think about this, in each case I have invoked a different kind of class of human thought. And Augustine is asking the question, where does that come from? As did Plato. Plato asked these questions. He dealt with the very same issues. The difference between Augustine and Plato is Plato finally found himself at the end of a road, and he just couldn't take the next step. He had to leave it with a sort of abstraction, an ideal world. He knew it had to be there, otherwise this world is utterly nonsensical. If that ideal world isn't there, according to Plato, then there is no beauty, there is no morality, there's really not even any predication, none of this, it all collapses. So Plato knew, his mind told him it had to be there. But he didn't know how to explain that it got there, and he couldn't give us any adequate answer as to why it was there or what's beyond it. It's just there, you see. That's where, as a Christian reading Plato, you're disappointed. Because you want Plato to take the next step. There must be the ideal world, therefore, Josiah, there must be God. Right? He never goes there. His God becomes a demiurge, or the pantheon, and all of these really poor excuses for a God. And we go, oh, Plato, come on, man. We thought you were on our team. We thought you were going to, from a pagan point of view, nevertheless, get us to the true God. We were excited to go with you on this quest, and when you finally walk down that path and show us the door to what we thought was going to be this wonderful theology, you leave us kind of disappointed. Well, Augustine doesn't do that. Augustine wants to give us all of this that we find in Plato, but he wants to say, I have a robust rationale for this ideal world because there is God. And the ideal world is there because it is there in the mind of God. That is where Plato's ideal world is, and it's the only place it could possibly be. It is in the mind of God. Where else could it be? And this becomes part of Augustine's apologetic. And it is part of what's called Augustine's presuppositional apologetic. And I don't know whether you're in apologetics, if you're getting to this stuff or not. But this is the best, most profound rationale for what you'd call a presuppositional apologetic. Augustine is the great champion of it. And if you really think it through, it is a pretty potent device to use in apologetics in a variety of ways. There are many arrows in this quiver, All right, so all of that. That's all footnote, and yes, I do want you to know every bit of this. I want you to know this like the proverbial back of your hand. This is good stuff for you. And so anyway, this is the footnote. All of this is eternal reason. This is all eternally true because it is eternally in the mind of God. All right. Human reason here can move in two directions. Augustine says our human reason can move up and can move down. It is, in a very biblical sense, right in the middle. It's the middle tier. We have a unique capacity as human beings to do that which we don't think any other creatures can do. At least we haven't come across any that give us any reasonable evidence that they can do it. First time I get a letter from an orangutan explaining some point in my theology that I messed up, I will reconsider this. But until then, I think we humans are unique because we have this mind which is capable of moving in two directions. We can think God's thoughts after him. We didn't invent reason. Aristotle didn't invent logic. He did discover it. He did formulate his discoveries in a way that's been helpful. But it's not as if no one had any logic in their heads until Aristotle. I mean, I've heard that. You'll hear that. Oh, that logic, that was just, Aristotle just came up with that. Oh, come on. You think Aristotle, and before Aristotle said it, that, A could be A and not A at the same time in the same space, do you think, the world just changed in some huge paradigm shift because Aristotle said these things? But you hear people say stupid things like that. No, Aristotle invented logic. Aristotle didn't invent anything in that sense. But he did brilliantly discover logic and formulate it in a way that nobody really had up until Aristotle. And when you're confronted with that by some ultra-liberal prof in college, you need to respond that way. You need to say, wait a minute, foul ball. Don't just kind of dismiss in this postmodern jungle you've created logic as an Aristotelian invention. Because when you go out and get in your car and drive home, you are using that same logic. You're saying, oh, I'm approaching an intersection, there's a Mack truck. That Mack truck cannot both be there and not there at the same time in the same space. My empirical faculties are telling me it is there. I'm going to go with my empiricism and slow my car down so I don't try to occupy the same space at the same time as that truck. That's logic. And you think that logic wasn't around before Aristotle? You bet it was. Except then they were talking about saber-toothed tigers. Ah, it's there. It can't both be there and not there at the same time. Therefore, I'm going to run. You know? See? Logic was in the mind of God. And we discovered it. Aristotle did a nice job of discovering the mind of God. You know. What Augustin wants us to understand is that we would never have come across that logic. We would never have thought about numbers, morality, beauty, predication. All of that was dependent on it already being there. And then God gave us the faculty to open that door, to open the window into heaven, as it were, and think about it. You know. And that's what we do. And all of science is a matter of just putting that to work. We send a man, at least allegedly, to the moon. I mean, you would think if we went there once in 1969, for crying out loud, we could have made it back in the last 50 years. I hope that at least before I'm dead, we'll get at least one more guy on the moon, because I'm beginning to wonder. But that's a different story. But the very fact that we can do that we can run the math, that we can do the formulas to get guys out and back, is because we discovered something of this universe that was in the mind of God. You know, I hope, that this is really the birth of what we call the scientific revolution. The belief that principles of rationality are in God's mind. They are reflected in a creation that invites us to do science. Right? And that's the third one, because our reason, the third one meaning the seminal reason. Our minds can also look downward beneath us at the creation, just as our minds can look upward at the mind of God. We are, in a sense, floating in the middle. Our minds can go both ways. Go upward to the mind of God. Now, when he talks about seminal reason, he means that, what's the word seminal? Anybody know that word? What does that mean? Seminal. Stephen, you know that word? Don't ask your ultimate metaphysical counterpart there.
I have no idea.
No idea. Anybody know this word, seminal? Anybody? Jake, you know this word? Seminal? You'll hear this, it's used commonly. You'll say it was really a seminal idea. You'll hear it put that way, or in that kind of context. Anybody? No? Go ahead.
Is it like a base idea, just kind of?
It is. It has a rather distinct idea to it. All right, learning moment, please get this. It's standard vocabulary, you need to know it. Seminal means seed. All right? Means seed. It really is the Latin form of the Greek word sperma, which means seed. Sperm. I don't want to get, this is not biology, and I don't want to distract you too much, but I think you know that a man produces what's called semen. That's the word. Sperma. Seed means the seed of something in the sense of the original genus of it, the original beginning of it. Now, I'm only saying this to you because it's a word you're going to commonly hear and you need to know it. So anyway, the idea here of seminal reason means seed reason, and what Augustine means by that is that the universe itself, that is body, here has a kind of rationality to it. This again is incredibly important in the culture in which you live because it is basically denied by at least the pop culture that you're living in. Augustin would say that there is a fundamental rationality in the material world that is not of its own creation. It is impressed upon it by this God who created it. There's a famous story of a guy who was converted to the Christian faith. He was a prisoner in a dungeon. He knew the Christian faith, but he'd always been a lifelong atheist, hostile to it. A famous guy, and I, for the life of me, can't put my finger on his name. It's a famous story, though, and one of these days I'm going to... But anyway, the story will stay with you. And it may be someone you've heard of. But anyway, he's imprisoned, and as he's got nothing much to do in this dungeon, there's one little shaft of sunlight that comes in. It's not tiny, it's dark, it's damp, it's ugly, you know. But he's got this one little shaft of light, and so that's all he's got to do all day is watch. That's his TV, you know, that little shaft of light that comes in. And as he's sitting there watching it, he sees a spider spinning a web. And as he watches the spider spin the web, he sees, he's a brilliant guy, he sees genius. The very act of making that web with such intricate detail, and the spider is busily going around doing stuff which, from an architect's point of view, is astonishing, you know. And at that point, sitting in that dungeon, he was converted by watching a spider spin a web, because he knew a rational human being cannot ultimately, with a straight face, say that spider is doing that by accident, and that's what you have to say. It's an ultimate accident, unless there's God. You see? And that's just one of an infinite number of examples we could talk about, as you are very well aware, that would represent rationality in the created order. Whether it's DNA, you know, whether it's the solar system and its operations, the delicate balance of the earth, etc. I mean, you know, the list goes on ad infinitum. But that is not something we imposed on it. This is the critical point. The universe is not rational because I've imposed my rationality on it. I've heard that, maybe you have too. If you haven't, you will. People out there in your postmodern culture say, the universe is basically utterly absurd, meaningless, nonsensical, and chaotic, and the only reason that it seems to be reasonable is because we have imposed reason on it with our minds. I've distorted my perceptions based on the imposition of my rational faculties. I've turned chaos into rationality by the exercise of my mind. Okay? That's the world in which you live. Augustine would stand up and cry, "Foul ball." That is not, that is so absurd that it hardly requires refutation, and yet there's people running around saying it all the time. The rationality is in the structure of the universe, and we discover it once again. So I can discover, as my mind looks upward, the mind of God. I can discover, as my mind looks downward, the rationality of things, the seminal reason that's built into things. And in a sense, I have this unique status as a human being of being able to look up and look down. God has put me here, to be able to think God's thoughts after Him, and yet to take those thoughts and apply them and recognize the evidence of His handiwork around me in this world in which I live. So far, so good? Kind of follow that? Then the last, I think I have time. I've been getting too juiced up about this. The last three levels, these are the levels of knowledge. The first level is called sapienta, S-A-P-I-E-N-T-A. The second line down is called scienta, S-C-I-E-N-T-A. And the third one down is, you can just write sensation. There's the word like sensata or something, but we'll just go with sensation. And this is then his epistemology. What is the basic meaning of the word sapienta? It's a Latin word, but you may know it. What's an expression we all know that uses some form of sapienta within it? You all know it. Everyone in this room knows it. It uses a form of the word sapienta. You think of it?
I think Homo sapiens.
Exactly. Very good. How many of you thought that might be what we're after? See? But no, only one brave person.
Yeah.
Homo sapien. What does sapien or sapienta mean? When I say, we as a species are called Homo sapien, it's a designation of us, distinguishes us from other animal-type creatures that are on this planet. What are we saying about us? We are Homo, man, the what? Is that word? Anybody know that word? Sapien? Sapient creatures, we'll say. Anybody know it? You don't know it? You're all Latin scholars, don't know that word? You know it, Sydney?
Well, I think it comes from the Latin verb sapere,
Okay.
which means to know.
It does, and it has a certain kind of element to it. It is to know, so it's sapient in that sense. But it has to do with knowing. It's often associated with the word wisdom, in other words, wisdom. Homo sapien is commonly rendered man the wise. I'm not so sure about that, to be honest with you. Take a look at this morning's newspaper. You're not so sure about man the wise. That's a little bit pretentious, it seems to me. But nevertheless, that's the idea. Augustin says that our application of our minds to think God's thoughts after him produces wisdom. And I wish I could continue this little discussion, because I know you are all on the edges of your seats with fascination. But I'm going to have to suspend it for one day. We'll pick up there tomorrow.